Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Craft Conversations. And today I'm here with two amazing artists and people, Sarah and Heather, that recently had a show in our gallery. Why don't you guys start by talking a little bit about yourself?
Sarah?
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Sarah Albu, based in Montreal, and very thankful to be included in this series and to have worked in Newfoundland with Heather and with the Craft Council. I'm a singer and sound artist, and I'm a knitter and spinner, and I dabble in some other textile stuff, but it's primarily knitting and spinning.
I'm Heather Barrett, and my day job is a journalist with CBC Radio, mostly in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'll do a little bit of online work and a small bit of video. I also make radio documentaries, but in my spare time, I'm an avid knitter, and I do have a long ago background in music. I'm really interested in how I guess all the things I do kind of interact with each other and interact with the arts and interact in ways that are creative.
So you both said that you're knitters. So how did you first came in contact with craft?
Hmm. Well, I guess from my point of view, I grew up with my mother and my grandmother in a traditional Newfoundland family. And especially with my grandmother, that was something that she always did. She just knew how to knit. So she would knit little hats and scarves and sweaters for myself and my sister. And my mother also knit a little bit, but she was more of a 70s modern woman. So she was out working outside the home, and she'd try to pick up a bit of knitting. And she'd always try to start a sweater for one of us, but we'd outgrow it by the time it was finished. So I grew up a little bit with it, and then I just put it away. It just wasn't my thing. I mean, I always had an appreciation for the work that other people did, but I never really took up knitting again until about 5 or 6 years ago. I just decided on a whim I was too much on my electronic devices. I needed an analog diversion, and I was admiring some beautiful pieces I was seeing at craft fairs. I thought, I should give this a try. And I got hooked.
Yeah, interesting. I have a parallel with the knitting kind of skipping a generation. So my mother's family, her mother, they were immigrants from Italy to Northern Ontario. And so she grew up on a farm making stuff because that's what they did, out of necessity, making clothing and household things. So my grandmother always knit and always sent us knitting, and I was interested in it as a child. And then someone in my choir, so here's this connection with music again, someone in my choir in high school was knitting, and it took that to get me really into it. But from the time that I restarted at 14, I haven't stopped. And then 3 years ago I started spinning pretty seriously, and I went to Nova Scotia and I apprenticed with a spinner there. And now my mom has gotten back into knitting because I'm so obsessed with it.
It's funny, my mother's gotten back into crochet, I think, because of my obsession.
It's funny, like, listen to your stories that both of you has this connection with the knitting, which is such a traditional Newfoundland craft, and crochet now it's coming back. Like, I've been seeing a lot of crochet coming back, and in the midst of that, like, you found a way to transform knitting into sound. And how did that relation start between, like, such a visual textile piece and, like, the sounds that comes behind it and from it?
Well, I met Heather when she participated in my project at the Sound Symposium. And the background on that project, again, comes back to music. That was kind of an earlier version of what we've done with the installation. This was a performance project with 2 other artists who I met while I was studying in Europe. And we were at an improvisation festival in Iceland. And it was my first time in Iceland, and I was saying to so one person was from New Zealand and one was from the Faroe Islands, and I was saying I have to find the wool. Like we have to go buy some wool, and we just started talking about how woolcraft is really important to all of our cultures, the 3 places that the 3 of us come from, and we're all musicians. And it came out of that conversation, like, okay, we should do some kind of project where we mix sound and spinning in a spinning wheel. And yeah, okay, we could do this with the needles. And all 3 of us had some experience with knitting. I was the one who was an obsessive knitter. And we developed a performance project together. And then when we brought it to Sound Symposium, I didn't want it to be the 3 of us performing for people. I wanted to meet people, because it's something that's so nice about the form, about craft, is you can have a connection with someone. Like you can go in somewhere and connect over that obsession over materials, even if you don't know them. So
I remember when Kathy Clark at the Sound Symposium connected both of us. And I remember, she asked me to find a group of knitters who could work with you on this. And I was talking to you over the phone, and you kept going, are you sure that these people are comfortable talking about knitting or doing a performance? And I kept saying, oh yeah, I'll be fine. And I think you kept saying, but oh, really? And then it's like, yeah, they're cool with it.
Yeah, because we tried an earlier version in the Faroe Islands, and the people that we interviewed, we would say, like, do you want to come perform with us? Do you want to tell your story on stage, maybe? Or we were looking for ways to create a kind of documentary performance. And these people were like, no, me on stage, no. And I had the opposite experience at the Sound Symposium. We just had a riot. We had so much fun. We bonded over knitting. And at the beginning of the week that we had to prepare it, I didn't even know what the performance would look like. I showed up with some tools.
Some really cool stuff.
And we just played, and we talked, and we crafted a performance from that.
And then this sound.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's such a satisfying musical experience. I wasn't quite expecting how satisfying musically it would be. Just very intentional, really good.
Yeah, and the sound that performance create ended up becoming a full gallery installation, which is like a completely different word from like the stage. And you also managed to bring that like stage factor into it by recording those knitters. And one thing that really caught my attention in the show was that one of the music composed was actually from a pair of trigger mitts. So I'm not a musician. I'm a textile artist, and I can understand like all the stitching that goes behind a trigger mitt. But how did you transform like the stitching into an actual sound to become like a music?
That's Christine Legros. That's her magic. That's some tools that I developed with my collaborators, that are metal knitting needles that when they touch create a sine tone. And so I assigned them to different pitches, and we were playing with them. I should have them out, but I don't. But imagine a pair of knitting needles that when they touch, they go doot, doot, doot. And I had 5 different pairs.
All at different pitches.
All at different pitches. And we met once, and we got to play with them and knit with them and handle the materials. And Christine came back the next day with a trigger mitt pattern that was colored in, and had assigned us each a color and said, let's try this.
And it's funny, like I never really thought of the parallels between a musical score and a knitting pattern until we all got together and talked. But there's so many parallels, just the way that, you know, a pattern is laid out, the way music notes are laid out. And it was almost like playing chamber music, like everybody was assigned a part and we were all following the same score and coordinating together.
Yeah, it's very interesting because like we don't really think about that. Like when we are making craft, like we don't think of all the other aspects for it. So like the tactile factor and the smell factor and the sound factor, and like with the show that you guys put together in the gallery, you actually have all these haptic sensory environment around the sounds of knitting. So you have the smells of the wool and the smells of the hay that feeds the sheep, and then you have the touch of the actual mitts and scarves and the wool itself and the fleece. So could you think that like every single craft object would be able to create a sound installation?
Totally.
Why not?
Totally.
Sure. Yes.
So in that sense, like craft goes just beyond what we conceive as craft today, which is like that usefulness of like an object. Like it goes to like all that sensory style of what we intending to do with that. Like it's the feeling, the visual, the touch, the smell, and I'm just fascinated with the work that you guys did together, and and it's really hard to not understand more why you decide to use wool, which is such a nice feeling to make the sound. And Sarah, you said you're a spinner, and one of the pieces is like the spinning wheel. How did that idea of the spinning wheel came to it, and the transformation on fleece to the final wool that we use to knit?
Well, for me, a lot of it was, so I wore my shirt that's, I don't know if it's backwards in the video, but it says "My body is technology," and that's it's from another performance piece that I did, but it's kind of about this idea of process, and like you have an object, but inside of that object is everything that was done to it, and every hand and creature that touched it on the way to it becoming what it is. So in my experience as a spinner, I'm a sound person, so I'm very aware of sound, and every spinning wheel that I've ever used has a different sound, and I get really drawn into the rhythm of it. So I wanted to document that and share that with people.
And you know, as someone who tells stories, there's almost a bit of a narrative going as you start at the very beginning of something and then work your way through all the different permutations as you get to the final product at the end, because you're going to encounter road bumps along the way, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to backtrack, you're going to consider and reconsider decisions as you go, and in a way making something from beginning to end is its own little story.
So did the whole sound behind knitting change the way you knit?
I know when we were preparing the performance, having things amplified changed the way that we knit. It made us more aware of, and when we were in the studio recording some of the sound for the installation too. I
found that when I was knitting with the group of everyone else, I had to be much more aware of exactly what everybody else was doing. So it was almost more like chamber music than it would be just sitting and kind of working on your own project. I had to be very aware of all of you.
And did you bring that like after the performance and after the installation was completed? are you still aware of all those sounds and like playfulness with the knitting when you're just at home, like knitting or spinning?
Yeah.
I have little songs when I do color work. Like I can't not do it now. I really have like do 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 do.
And I'm assuming that all those points is assigned to a different stitch or
Yeah, and I'm not doing it consciously. I catch myself doing it.
I find I'm a lot more aware of, just the clicks of the needle and even the sound of wool kind of rubbing against each other. Like I'm just more mindful as to the sounds, and I smell it more. I think about the smells and just, the environment in which the wool is sitting. Like it just, it's more now, I think.
I think a big part of this project was also the research that was done behind it, like the historical importance and like the history of like knitters and like their life paths. How did you manage to combine that historical side of the knitting within the show?
Well, we had help from Dale Jarvis and folklore students from MUN.
Yeah, and they jumped on board. They were fascinated with what they were doing and offered their help. So they collected stories from knitters and recorded them, and we were able to use those recordings that they collected, incorporated them into the story chair piece that we had, and they also created a written book accompaniment to everything. It was wonderful.
Right, I actually have a copy of the book right here.
Yeah.
And what fascinates me about this historical aspect is that like the history of knitting behind each family. Like when you introduce yourselves, you talk about it came from my grandmother or it came from my mother, and that's like a tradition that has been passed on. And within the sounds that you create, the soundscapes you created, you had, as you said, like the story chair, which people could like listen to stories. Was that one of the focus of the show when you were creating it, or that came after, was an afterthought to create that piece?
I think that was one of the first things.
Mm-hmm.
The image of the rocking chair when we started brainstorming.
Mm-hmm. We did a lot of brainstorming and a lot of talking and a lot of, and as we talked it out, I think we came to, the pieces that we eventually thought that we could see in the exhibit. So that was a big part of it, I think.
Do you want to run us through the exhibition a little bit, like the pieces that you had on the exhibition?
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So we walk into the room, and let's go clockwise. Well, you walk into the room and you turn to your left and you see some lovely outdoorsy lighting and hay and some lumps, some felty lumps, and you hear some sheep vocalizations that Heather recorded and that we arranged, and you see a fence made out of different sizes of knitting needles with two wands that you can kind of run along the knitting needles, and one is amplified and one is acoustic, so you can hear different hear the tools.
And I'll say the knitting needle fence kind of reminds me of a snow fence that you'd see strung across fields in Newfoundland in the winter to kind of block the snow. So it's very reminiscent. And then we continue going in a clockwise direction, and we get to the corner with the story chair, which is a traditionally built Newfoundland rocker. And we worked with Glenn Rice, who's a master carpenter and an accomplished classical clarinetist, by the way. But he devised a setup where we could put two small computer speakers right up on the shoulders of the chair. And then Sarah, you worked with, what was it?
With Erin G and Martin Marie. team.
And in Montreal to, well, why don't you explain the sensor cushion that's underneath it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a pressure sensor cushion. So when you sit on it, it plays a story or a few stories until you get up. So you can sit, but you only hear it if you're very close. So you sit back in the chair and you have someone tell you in your ears.
And what we've done is program in fragments of the stories that Dale's folklore students gathered. So you'll sit there and you'll rock in the chair and hear, you know, maybe a 5 to 30-second fragment of a fragment of a thought about knitting from various women. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and in the corner with the chair and kind of emanating out into the room is a global soundscape of a fireplace, and that was again a Christine Legros arrangement and a collaboration with our knitting band. And we recorded in the studio of where we got together and we played. We got together with a bunch of different knitting needles and tools. You hear these kind of crinkly, popping, kind of fireplace sounds.
So that was also made with knitting needles?
Everything, yeah, all the sound in the fireplace is made out of textile tools. There's a swift, like some of the, once the fire really gets roaring, that's the swift turning.
Wow.
But yeah, everything is made.
I didn't know that. Like,
Okay.
I listened to that sound for quite a few days. And
we used the sound studio at NIFCO, and it was incredible, like the sensitivity of the equipment to pick up what we were doing, because what we're doing was actually very, very quiet. But it like you're just right in it when you listen to the recording. It's really something else. And Michelle Lacour was our audio engineer for that. She just absolutely knew the right way to kind of set up the room just to capture that environment.
And then moving from the chair, there is like the earmuff.
The listening wall of mittens.
There we go.
Yeah. So it is like a series of hooks. I think there's like 5 pegs on a board on the wall. And from them hang 5 pairs of mittens, and they come from Spindrift Mittens. That's Christine and Shirley Scott's company. And what Sarah has done is embedded speakers in the palms of the mittens. And both Sarah and I went out and collected various types of ambient sound to program in the mittens. And then what happens?
You put them on your hands. You put the mittens on your hands, and then you might be able to hear a little bit, like a little aura of sound as you walk past the wall, but you get a clearer idea of what you're listening to only when you get the mittens over your ears. And it's so nice to watch people going up to the wall and putting the mittens on very delicately and doing this.
And
it's cool. They don't know what to expect. Like they're really unsure, but then as they get it, they smile, and then they go to every single pair of mittens.
And each one of them has a different sound. What's the sounds in them?
I did a bunch of ambient outdoor sounds. I went down to Middle Cove and I got sounds of beach waves rolling in on the beach. I got wet while I was doing it. I set up too close to the water and I got soaked in the middle of November. And there's river water as well, like water flowing over rocks. And I think, Sarah, you've got some indoor sounds as well.
Yeah, there's another outdoor one that I don't think anyone guessed it that I talked to. It's Heather's recording of a sheep chewing.
Right, I forgot about that.
Very, very close.
Yeah.
That's kind of the very, very early in the process of getting a wool garment. The sheep eats the grass.
It's actually a strangely enjoyable sound. Like, who knew?
And then the other 2 sounds are indoor.
There's the carding brushes and the swift.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, what happens? I think that's the one that I was talking before is the music pattern.
Yeah.
Labrador Diamond number 2. Yeah, so we have a recording of our performance from the Sound Symposium there to listen to on a portable compact disc player.
Yeah, burned on a CDR.
Wow.
Yeah, old school.
Tactile.
Yeah. And then Christine developed the 5 different scores, one for each of the players in it. So the scores are framed and on the wall, so you can follow along, I guess, the written guide that we took for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then she knit a pair of trigger mitts out of the colors that we had chosen for the way that they sound when they're spoken out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So then it went back into mitten, which is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it comes the spinning wheel, which it's fascinating to listen to when people are spinning it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like that amazing device that is super heavy and very old school.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic. What's the name?
It's a reel-to-reel audio machine, and what's the brand name on it again? Oh,
it's a Studer.
It's a Studer. It's and it accommodates 1/4-inch audio tape. And actually that's the machine, the kind of machine that I started my radio career on. We actually literally recorded our interviews mobile in the field onto a Sony cassette recorder about the size of a brick. And a technician had to transfer the cassette sound onto the 1/4-inch tape, which fits on one of those machines. And then to edit a story, we literally cut tape. You would sit in front of that reel-to-reel Studer machine, twist the 2 reels to make it kind of loose, put the tape down in a little embedded slot on the machine, and use a straight razor blade to slice it, and then slice another part and literally stick it together with a special kind of tape to make it go over the heads and create the sound.
And what was the sound that you guys recorded on that?
Yeah, that was spinning wheel.
Right.
And I recorded it with homemade contact microphones on my spinning wheel, so it sounds really, really glitchy.
But it's still really interesting, and it's funny because I use the machine for very practical purposes. You know, trying to edit an interview, which is something you just do with a computer screen and a mouse now, but. You know, I still feel like I'm still learning how to use that machine and the potential of it in an art situation. So it's, yeah, it's amazing.
And then you guys created like a tiny museum of curiosities on the side, which was fascinating. Then you have like the tapes and you try to knead something out of the tape, right?
Yeah.
It's like a creature.
Yeah.
And how was the feeling of kneading with such an unconventional material?
It was yucky.
Yeah, it was toxic.
Yeah.
We started coughing.
Oh my God.
But have you knit with tape?
Yeah. Well, we sat, I went up to Montreal to work with Sarah for a few days. So she came over to where I was staying. We're sitting there and I actually had medical gloves bought because I found, I handled it a little bit before and just found it really unpleasant to handle like that. We were sitting there with like our blue medical gloves on, knitting away, and just neither one of us was enjoying it. And we just kind of, yeah, we coughed and I kind of felt this metallic taste in my mouth. And then we started to Google and realized that it was probably toxic. So we stopped.
So my last question for you guys is there another show coming? In a different material, in a different craft, sound incorporated or sound based? Is there something like on the go in your minds that are like, oh, after putting this together, I really would like to explore something different?
I'm still really interested in exploring the potential of things that we have right now. Like, I mean, the story chair, I see so much potential for community use for it. I mean, you could take it anywhere that people knit and collect people's stories and load it up in the chair and let people interact with it. But that's not to say there are other things that could be done. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird time to be thinking about new projects, but ideas are coming are coming to me. I think I learned a lot. This was the first time I've done something quite like this, and it's the first time I've worked in a gallery setting. So I have a lot of ideas about placing things or like directing people's attention. But nothing concrete.
Yeah, just watching people interact with it a little bit made me I'd like to see more people interact with it just to see from there. And I guess we also have questions now too on I guess for the next little while, like, are people going to want to touch things and interact with things? Like, how do we go forward with that, with everything in an art situation?
Right. Yeah, that's a situation that is actually like it's changing the way the art is perceived. Because like for visual arts and especially for gallery environments, like it's the gathering and the touching and the feel of the pieces, especially when we're talking about craft, that like it is something made to be handled. That definitely is going to change a little bit, and like how we promote that, how we move forward in this brand new world that we're going to see coming up.
I know, Sarah, you were telling me about the Yoko Ono exhibit in Montreal and the really participatory element of it and sort of the really tactile element of it. And I think we both got really excited about that idea that people can interact with the art and you can touch it and use all your senses. And there's so much accessibility. But like, I don't know what people are going to want to do from here on in. I don't know.
Yeah, like something that I would be excited about if we're talking about a different project is having is relating to voice, which is that's kind of my first field and my most active field is like, is there a way that I could have people contribute to a collaborative voice piece without putting themselves and each other in danger? In the voice world, we're talking a lot about droplets. And
I know
singing spreads droplets. And then if this was a gallery setting where you had to touch something to record, I would want to think about finding alternatives, like finding a way to encourage people to use their voices without having to touch something or spread droplets.
I'm thinking a lot about community and a lot about participation and how to do that in a way that now doesn't make people feel uncomfortable just because of our situation. Like, I don't know how we're all going to feel about touching things or interacting with things, as time goes on. So it's a lot of big questions that I think we didn't foresee having to wrestle with.
Well, that's definitely going to change completely the way we see a gallery setup and in the future. So, well, on that note, I'd just like to thank you both so much for the work that you did and for the beautiful show that you put in our gallery. And I hope that people understand that like there is way more on craft than just like the final product, like the final thing that you see. And thank you for taking the time today to be here in this square world that we live in now, to talk about the show and to talk about what's going to happen next and how can we perceive craft in a different way.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.